Verse 28 says, "Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed. But I kept the matter in my heart." He's greatly alarmed. He's kind of freaked out. And I've experienced that. Perhaps you have too. It's disconcerting when we hear and learn about all of the craziness that happens in the world. And whenever we hear about Bible prophecy and the Antichrist and the mark of the beast and like all of this stuff, it can be alarming. And so Daniel's words at the end of Daniel 7 really can resonate, I think, for a lot of us if we're honest. And because of that, everything that's happening that we're all hearing about in the world constantly right now, I wanted to just read to you from Mark 13, verse 1. "And as Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.'" They're kind of gawking at the temple. And Jesus says, verse 2, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?" The Olivet Discourse, one of the most well-known discourses, teachings Jesus gave concerning last things, eschatology. We've always been the same as the people of God. We've always been very interested and perhaps a bit obsessed with, when is all of this stuff, the end times, the last things, when is this stuff going to happen and what's going to be the sign? Jesus said to them, verse 5, "See that no one leads you astray." And I'm just like, okay, that's a word for me. That's a word for us. See that no one leads you astray. I want to check myself here because I could be wrong on the chapter. This is a side note that I didn't plan on sharing, but I'm going to share. Deuteronomy 13. "If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, 'Let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them,' you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Moses is telling the children of Israel, there will be false prophets, and sometimes God will allow them to get something right. But they lead you astray. And so even if somebody goes on Instagram Live and makes prophecies or predictions or things, and we see this all over the place, and I think we're going to see it more and more in the coming years. Social media prophets, even people in the context of church making all kinds of prophecies and saying, "I had this dream, and look, this one came to pass." Moses says to the children of Israel, hey, tune into this. Test them. Test their word. See where they're what's their ultimate aim? What's their ultimate goal? Are they leading you astray, or are they, Moses was a true prophet, right? So there is truth that is proclaimed. But in the context of the Olivet Discourse and the disciples saying, when is all this stuff going to happen? And what's the deal? The first thing Jesus says is, don't let anybody lead you astray. Don't let anybody deceive you. Then he says, verse 6, many will come in my name, saying, I am he. There will be false prophets. There will also be false messiahs. And they will lead many astray. So they're not just going to be, going on a walk, or someone who leads and nobody follows simply goes on a walk, right? No, there's gonna be a following. So numbers aren't even necessarily indicative of truthfulness. There will be false prophets, false messiahs. Many will be led astray. Don't be among that number. Verse 7, and when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, tune in, take note, obsess over, because that is the sign. No. Jesus says, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. This is part of God's plan. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, all over the place. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of birth pangs. And I think sometimes we emphasize that a baby's coming because birth pangs happen. The further along you get, the more intense they become, the more frequent they become. And so we tend to emphasize, birth pangs are happening. The baby's about to be here. It's right now. But when you read what Jesus is saying, he's saying the end is not yet. The baby's not here. It is a birth pang, but it is not the baby. And so when everybody around you gets alarmed, and when I become alarmed, because sometimes things are alarming, that's real. When you hear about people chanting first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, and you're a Sunday people, it's it can be what it is. It can be alarming. Jesus says, hey, understand that this stuff's gonna take place. You don't need to be alarmed. The end is not yet. And when you look at the whole of Jesus' teaching, we're not to be ignorant by any stretch of things that happen. And so I do tune in to things that happen. I am aware of what's going on in the Middle East. But the main thing is Jesus Christ, seeking him first, his kingdom, his righteousness, and then all of these other things will be added unto you. Meaning financial stuff, other things will be added unto you. Shelter, food, clothing. Jesus says the Father knows you have need of these things. But also how all of the dots connect and how all of the prophecies unfold. That'll, I think, be added unto us as well. And so for whatever it's worth, whenever I wanted to end at the beginning and make this note up front that things are alarming and people are alarmed, and that's understandable. Even Daniel the prophet was alarmed sometimes. But Jesus speaks this word, and for me it's a helpful one. And so I just wanted to share that with you. As we dive into Daniel 7, we're looping back. Last week we read through. I didn't study in depth the verses, but we looked at verse 1 through 22. And I wanted to just kind of give a big flyover. I also wanted to identify some pitfalls we want to avoid when we approach Bible prophecy on the whole. We don't want to be overly cautious. It's one ditch on one side of the road. We don't want to be overly confident. That's another ditch on the other side of the road. We talked about that. And I wanted to look at just kind of the big picture point of Daniel chapter 7, and that is that though these kings and kingdoms that Daniel sees in his vision portrayed as beasts coming out of the sea, which the sea is the earth, right? And these kingdoms come out. God takes him from what he knows and is living in, Babylon and the Medo-Persian Empire, portrayed by the lion with wings, and then what's the second one? It's the bear that's hunched over on one side, the Medes and the Persians. And it's this bizarre thing, right? The wings are plucked off the lion and then stood up and given the mind of the man. We talked about that a little bit last week, so I'm not gonna rehash that necessarily. And you see this bear, it's hunched up on one side. The picture is that this bear is devouring some other kind of beast. It's like it pops its head up and it's got 3 ribs and blood hanging out of its mouth. It's this radical, beastly creature. And we see a leopard, but it's not just any leopard. It's a leopard, also has wings, has 4 heads. After the Medo-Persian Empire, we see the Greek Empire. Talked about that a little bit last week. But then there's this 4th beast. And unlike the 3 that came before it, it has no simile. There's no animal that Daniel is able to reach for and say, this beast is like a lion, like a bear, like a He looks at this 4th beast and he's like, what is that? It's exceedingly, like all of them are kind of scary, but this one's exceedingly scary. It's got metal teeth. It's got 10 horns. And then there's this little horn that emerges from the rest of the horns and it takes out 3 of the previous horns. And this little horn's got eyes and it's got a mouth and it speaks great things. It's like this wild, wild vision. But then we see God the Father portrayed. Oh, and that 4th beast is Rome. We'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. But then in verse 9, he says, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. God the Father is described as the Ancient of Days. There was never a time when God was not, and there will never be a time where God will not be. He's the eternal God and Father, the Ancient of Days, and he takes his seat, his clothing white as snow, his hair, the hair of his head, it says, like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Fiery flames in the Bible speak often of judgment. Also, fiery flames speak often of purity and holiness. And we see that this seat upon which the Ancient of Days is sat, it's got fiery flames and it's got wheels. It's mobile. God isn't stuck in any one place. He's on the move. And the wheels are of this burning fire, verse 10. And a stream of fire issued and came out from before him, and 1,000,000 served him. I think we can conclude that that is most likely referring to the mass amount of angels, the angelic host that is around the throne serving the Lord. And 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. I think we can also conclude that there's people there. There's all kinds of angels and people. There's these masses around him, and it says they stand before him, and the court sat in judgment, and the books were open. So this fiery throne upon which the Ancient of Days is seated, it's as if the fire that issues forth from it issues forth from it in judgment and in justice. Fire speaks of judgment. Fire speaks of holiness and purity. I think the idea is that whatever comes within this proximity of the holy throne of the Ancient of Days, the great judge, whatever comes within this proximity of this seat that is not holy, but that is sinful, it is consumed in judgment and justice. If it's not perfectly pure. Remember when the Bible talks about how the gold and silver and the precious stones make it through the fire, but then the wood and the hay and the stubble get burned up? I think that's happening in this scene, in this judgment courtroom scene, because then verse 11 says, the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, that crazy little horn with eyes and a mouth, that guy, that one, Daniel says, as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. And as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So these evil beasts and horns and little horn, they're judged around the righteous throne and fires of God. It's this wild vision. But then it gets better. I saw in the night visions, verse 13, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, verse 15, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. This again. And he says in verse 16, I approached those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. And this is where I kind of wanted to recap and just kind of refresh the fantastic vision that Daniel has. And now I want to, instead of just picking up in verse 23, because we read through verse 22 last time, I want to pick it up here. Because this is where the interpreter helps Daniel understand all of the craziness we've just been looking at. Before we dive into the words of this interpreter, I wanted to share a quote with you from G.K. Chesterton. Because we're looking at fantastic stuff. Think fantasy novels and stories. Think sci-fi. think fairy tales. Because out of the sea, like we're gonna see. Look with me, verse 17. The interpreter says to Daniel, these four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. So that's why we know that the sea described, that the four winds come upon and stir up. Behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, verse 2. It's speaking of the world. It's speaking of the earth. And this interpreter says that out of the earth arise four kings with their kingdoms. But to describe these kings and their kingdoms, he doesn't just describe them with everyday jargon. It feels like you're reading Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, or like it feels like this wild, fantastic kind of vision and story. It's what theologians call apocalyptic literature. G.K. Chesterton said, fairy tales do not tell children dragons exist. Children already know they exist. That's interesting. He says, fairy tales tell children that dragons can be killed. We don't need to tell you that there's big scaries out there. You know there's big scaries out there. What we need to tell our children, what we need to know ourselves, is that the big scaries, they can be killed and done away with. And why I like that quote so much in light of the text that we're in is because sometimes fantasy is a little bit closer to reality than we give it credit for. There is a whole, like I can see the trees out this window and the tables out there and the grass, the clouds. But there's so much that I can't. The Holy Spirit among us, I can't see him. Angels that are dispatched and employed to minister and serve and guard and protect here among us now. I see none of them. Satan, demons, I can't see him. Remember when Gehazi, the prophet's servant in the Old Testament, is freaking out. He's being alarmed because armies are coming. And I always forget if it's Elijah or Elisha. That's why I said the prophet. But whoever it was prays that his eyes would be opened. And his eyes are open and he can see the angelic host all around. And all of a sudden, he's not scared anymore. Chariots of fire. I mean, like Narnia. Like, not Narnia, but you hear my heart here. Like, there is a whole reality that I cannot see, but that is biblical and true. And sometimes I think we get this kind of apocalyptic literature because it's helpful to help stretch us, because there are no words. Paul said, I think it was Paul, he said, it'd be unlawful for me to try and communicate heaven to you. The things that I've seen, we don't have the vernacular. We don't have the language. We don't have we don't have it. And then John the Apostle is like, well, I'm going to try. And so we see all of this stuff that's just, it's beyond us. And I think that if we try and draw it, we'll probably picture it wrong. Like, I can't paint what John the Apostle saw, what Daniel saw, what Paul saw. But I think the Lord is like, hey, I just want to help you catch a glimpse that this thing's bigger than what you can see. It's bigger than what you're aware of. And evil is a real thing. And it exists in a form that I think is bigger and even more scary and intense than we realize oftentimes. It's not just a lion. It's a lion with, can you imagine a lion with wings? Think of how an eagle swoops down on its prey. But instead of the beak, make it the jaws, the claws flying at you. A leopard with 4 heads. I mean, like, this stuff is extra. And then there's this beast with all of these horns. And I think on a base level, it's safe to say the animals with horns typically win over animals without horns. I mean, I'm thinking ram. I'm thinking rhino. These without horns, chihuahua, lamb, I don't know. Power, dominance, strength, authority. That's the imagery that is connotated with horns. This beast is radical. Metal teeth. It crushes, stomps, devours all the nations. This thing is radical. And I think it's meant to freak us out in the sense that we don't have a full grasp of the true picture, the reality, not just physical but spiritual as well. It's big. It's intense. These 4 beasts are 4 kings who arise out of the earth. But God is bigger than the boogeyman. Junior Asparagus taught me that. He's bigger than Godzilla or the monsters on TV. God is bigger than the boogeyman, and he's watching out for you and me. That's what it says, essentially. The saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. As big and ferocious, even bigger than you may have a category for in your present limited capacity of thinking and brain power. God is infinitely greater than that. So think bigger and then allow your brain to explode, because it cannot contain even the remote thought of how big and strong the true and living God is. And all of these beasts and all of these kingdoms, they're temporary. They will pass away. They will be judged and destroyed. And then the Ancient of Days will appoint one like the Son of Man, and Jesus will be given a kingdom that has no end. It's the big picture. But Daniel, he wants to know, again, that one's like a lion, that one's like a bear, that one's like a leopard with 4 heads. It's kind of like a leopard, though. What is the deal with the 4th one? What's that thing? Okay, that's the idea. Verse 19, I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest. All of them were different, all of them were extra, but this one even more so. It was exceedingly terrifying, verse 19, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. And I wanted to know about the 10 horns, verse 20. The 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of the other horns fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth and spoke great things that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, the horn, the little horn, it made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Freaked me out. Verse 22. Until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus, this interpreter, he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. And it shall devour the whole earth. It's going to be a global thing. And trample it down and break it to pieces. The beasts correspond with the metals of the statue that were in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I talked about that last week, but you have the head of gold and the lion with wings, speaking of Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar. Then you have the arms of silver and the bear hunched up on one side, the Medo-Persian Empire. Hunched up on one side because one of those silver arms was stronger than the other one. The Persians would outshine the Medes. Then you have the belly of bronze, the leopard with the 4 heads, with wings. Just about 10 years, Alexander the Great led the Greeks in conquering the known world. He died a young death. Most conclude and agree that the 4 heads speak of the 4 generals that the Greek Empire was divided among. So you have the bronze belly, the leopard 4 heads, Alexander the Great. We're going to talk more about Alexander in chapter 8. But then you got this 4th beast with no simile. It's just a beastly beast. It's a scary beast. It's got all these horns, and then we've been talking about it, right? You got this one, and this one's different. And I think what really makes this beast different is that it, in a sense, transcends just the Roman Empire. That's the correlation, the iron legs. But it's different because then the iron legs goes down into the feet. And in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, it's these feet that are iron mixed with clay. And we've seen how the legs makes great sense, but we all get confused and we all start making guesses about what the 10 toes is going to represent. We can see the beastly empire of Rome, but then we're trying to figure out what is with the 10 horns. How is that going to be fulfilled? The 10 toes, the 10 horns, and the little horn, we're still fuzzy on it because it's yet to be fulfilled. And in this sense, the 4th beast is so different. But it's from this idea that where Daniel's saying there shall be a 4th kingdom, different And it's going to have these horns protruding from its head. Daniel 9 is going to help us with the sequence of things, because the Roman Empire's faded away a long time ago. But because of Daniel 7, and really the whole second half of the book of Daniel, you piece it together with other parts of Scripture, it seems like the vision is saying there's going to be some sort of revived Roman Empire. And we get all excited talking about the European Union or talking about whoever and whatever else. And it's intriguing and it can be fun to speculate. But I don't see a ton of value in it. We just don't know yet. But it seems reasonable to me to conclude there's going to be some sort of revived Roman Empire. And chapter and verse, Daniel 7, verse 23 says, "There shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth, trample it down, break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns," verse 24, "out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. And he shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings." That's the little horn that takes out 3 of the other horns like we read a minute ago. And what we speculate, I think very reasonably conclude there's going to be some sort of revived Roman Empire that we haven't seen. We don't know what that looks like. A lot of people love talking, like I said, about the European Union, maybe. Whatever it looks like, 10 leaders, 10 kings are going to arise. But then, and you hesitate to say Antichrist because people have so many concepts and so many mental pictures and so many, just ideas of Antichrist and what that is and means. But it's a Bible term. And so we can't shy away from a Bible term. This little horn is that one known as the Antichrist. And the goal today isn't to do an exhaustive study on the Antichrist. We don't have the time. But I want to share with you what this text, not every text, but what this text gives us concerning this one called the Antichrist. People say all kinds of different stuff. People have all kinds of different ideas. I want to share with you the thoughts and ideas that are given to us explicitly in Daniel chapter 7 concerning this Antichrist, this little horn. He's got eyes. He's got a big mouth. What does this mean? Well, verse 25 says, verse 24 says he's going to take out 3 of those 10 leaders. So whatever the 10 toes are, whatever the 10 horns are, 3 of them he's going to take out. And the other 7 seem to just fall in line and follow his lead. This guy's going to be a winner. Verse 25 says, so 3 things I want to point out about this little horn, this Antichrist. First phrase, verse 25, he shall speak words against the Most High. First, he will speak out against God. He will speak out. He's going to blaspheme. He's a figurehead. He's an executive figurehead for all of evil, all of fallen humanity. We've talked about in the book of Daniel how Babylon, throughout the entire Bible, is this archetype of human evil and wrongdoing. It's this archetype of the world system that stands and shakes its fist in rebellion against God. He will speak out against God. He leads the charge in this. He's the executive figurehead in this way. Secondly, not only will he speak out against God, it says then, he shall wear out the saints of the Most High. So he'll speak out against God, and he will lash out against God's people. He'll lash out against God's people with ideas, with teaching, ideology, and straight up persecution. He speaks out against God. He lashes out against God's people. And finally, he will bring out big ideas. Third phrase, verse 25. And it says, shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time that's 1 year, times that's 2 years, and half a time. 3.5 years. We'll get back to the time frame stuff in chapter 9. But what I want to say here is the Antichrist is one who obviously is against Christ. He's a counterfeit to Christ. In the book of Revelation, we see a counterfeit or unholy trinity. Right? This is everything God does, Satan seeks to counterfeit and tear down. So he's this anti-Christ. He's against Christ. He speaks out against God. He lashes out against God's people, and he brings out big ideas and seeks to change the times and the laws. People have all kinds of guesses as to what that means. We don't know exactly what that means, and that's okay. So I'm content to just say, this guy, he's going to bring out big ideas. Whether that's laws concerning worship, maybe, I don't know. Whether that's peace in the Middle East, there's all kinds of things that we could guess. But he's going to have big ideas, and he's going to have victory and success in leading in a way that the world will follow. That's what's communicated in this text. They, the kingdoms and kings of this world, shall be given into his hand for 3.5 years. A time times half a time. And like I said, we'll get back to the timing and all that kind of stuff. Daniel's 70 weeks is a big section where we're going to deal with that. But when I was looking at this, I just thought to myself, man, one just practical application that is something that gives me lots of peace at various times in my life is that the beasts, meaning Satan, principalities, powers, demonic forces, so forth, but then also the earthly empires and powers in this world. We think that presidents and prime ministers and teachers and coaches and employers, and we think they hold the power and pull the strings, but truly it all belongs to God and is under the sovereignty of his good hand. And he has one hand on the timer and he has his other hand on the temperature. I love that. I didn't make it up. I don't even know where that originated, but God has one hand on the timer and the other hand on the temperature. Think of like baking something. It's gotta go through this fiery oven, think pizza, there we go. It's gotta go through the fiery oven for a little bit. Like it needs to get cooked for the desired end. And it needs to be hot. You don't want to just like burn the thing. Like you could just burn it. Like you don't want to be too hot. It's like, so we got to have a hand on the temperature. But then also, even if it's the right heat, not enough time in that heat won't produce the desired end result. But too much time in that heat will burn it, right? So a good pizza chef needs to have a hand on both of these. These beasts, whether we're talking spiritual or whether we're talking physical, they're God's beasts. And they can only be as bad as God allows them to be. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that, Hitler could have been worse. It's only as bad as God allows it to be. The Antichrist is only given so much power, is only given so much dominion, so much influence, so much success. God has his hand on that. Was it in Job where it talks about how the Lord is the one who tells the tide, who tells the ocean, you can only come this far? Right? Or maybe that was just a Christian song. I can't remember. The point's true. This is how far. Here's the line. You can only come this far. The chaotic sea, the chaotic world, and these kings and kingdoms emerging from it. God has a line they can't cross. And a timer. The Antichrist is he's gonna emerge from this wild beast without simile. He's gonna speak out against God. He's gonna lash out against the people of God. He's gonna bring out all of these big ideas in a way that captivates and convinces the world to follow. But only for a determined time. God has a hand on the temperature and he has a hand on the timer. This is not only true on a global, historical, big picture level. This is true in your life. Sometimes, like the psalmist cried out, "How long, O Lord, until you deliver me?" The Lord would say to us, I've got a hand on the timer. How long? Just the right amount of time. I'm not going to undercook it. I'm not going to burn it. The heat, I can't stand the heat. I just want out the kitchen. In my relationship, in my finances, in whatever it may be. How hot? The Lord says, hey, I know you feel like you can't handle this heat, but I've got my hand on the temperature. Globally, eternally, this is true. In the minutia and personally, this is true. It gives me peace. Verse 26. But the court shall sit in judgment. So after this appointed time, we see he's interpreting, right? We're interpreting what we've already read. So verse 9 through 12, this is what's going on, the interpreter says. The court shall sit in judgment. And the dominion of this Antichrist, this little horn, it'll be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And concerning the next part with the Son of Man, the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Here's the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me. My color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. This vision contrasts Antichrist with Jesus Christ in a way that I find striking, powerful, and meaningful. I'm going to close with that. But first, I just want to point out two critical observations from this text concerning Jesus. Two things we need to nail down and have. Like, we can't speak authoritatively concerning what exactly the 10 kings are going to be. We can speak about who Jesus is, though. And this text gives us two critical fundamentals to understanding Jesus rightly. Jesus is the Son of Man. And the Son of Man is truly God. The Son of Man is truly God. What do we think about Jesus? Well, we must think Jesus is truly God. Look at verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. With the clouds of heaven. The clouds speak of the glory and presence of God. When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, what was around the mountain? When the children of Israel were trying to find their way and they needed God's leadership through the wilderness, what led them by day? What filled the temple with glory? It was these clouds, right? It speaks of divinity. The Son of Man, when we see the heavens open and one like the Son of Man coming down with the clouds, that's not just any man. To descend upon the clouds. Like, can you do that? No, only God can do that. This is the one who is God. But what's interesting is that beyond the fact that he comes with the clouds, that would be enough for me to say that's God. But also, verse 14, to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. In verse 14, where it says that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him, that Aramaic word means serve. It means to worship. If the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is not God, it contradicts the entire context of the book of Daniel. What has this book been about? It's been about Daniel and his friends refusing to serve and worship anyone or anything besides the true and living God of Israel. That's why they went into the fiery furnace. That's why he went into the lion's den. I will not pray. I will not serve. I will not worship the statue or King Darius. No, I exist for the glory of the one true and living God. And the point of the Ancient of Days giving the Son of Man, verse 14, dominion and glory and a kingdom, is so that, it says that, all peoples, nations, and languages should worship him. God is a jealous God. We talked about this in Jonah and Nahum. He doesn't share his glory with any other. This has to be God. He's coming in the clouds in a way that I can't. But also, he is appointed by the Ancient of Days and anointed and endowed with dominion and glory and power and a kingdom so that he will receive worship and that all peoples of all tribes and tongues will serve him. This is God. But secondly, the Son of Man is truly human. It's Son of Man. Literally, son of Adam, or the human one. It's the human one. And it's this weird plot twist because, the clouds open and you expect the Ancient of Days. You expect God, but then you get a man. And it's like that's weird. Right? Like everybody's worshiping God, but everybody's worshiping this man, this human one. Father, Son, Spirit, one divine being existing eternally in these three persons. God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, was not always truly human, but through eternity past was just divine. It sounds so funny to say just divine, but only God, and he did not yet have a human nature. But with the incarnation, when he's conceived of the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary, the second person of the Trinity has a human nature added to his divine nature. And It's him. Jesus is the only one, truly God and truly human. Only God can overcome evil, sin, Satan, these beasts. But only a human could represent us as our champion. So fully God and fully man, the Son of Man is Jesus the Christ. And Jesus loved Daniel 7. I know that because he referred to himself as the Son of Man more than any other title. He could have gone by Emmanuel. He could have gone by Prince of Peace. He could have gone by, he could have gone by all kinds of, there's lots of names for God and Christ in the Bible. Son of God. Jesus refers to himself more than any other title or in any other way. He refers to himself as the Son of Man. He wants us to hyperlink him. Like for anybody who's trying to figure out who he is, he wants them to hyperlink straight to Daniel 7. That's me. That's it right there. That's me. So Jesus is truly God and he's truly human. And in this text, he's sharply contrasted with Antichrist. Antichrist emerges in Daniel 7 with a kingdom that is derived from this world. And he stands as the executive figurehead of a fallen humanity, evil, rebellion against God. And the Father, he's presented before the Father, and the Father executes judgment against him and takes away his kingdom and dominion forever. That's Antichrist. Jesus Christ emerges not with a kingdom derived from this world. He emerges with the clouds of heaven. He came to set up a kingdom that is not derived from this world. He emerges with the clouds of heaven, and he stands as the executive figurehead of a redeemed humanity and of righteousness. The Father judges him too. But Jesus is declared righteous. It's glorious. And where the Father takes away the kingdom of the Antichrist forever, he gives Jesus a kingdom that will be a forever kingdom. People like to go house hunting and find, this is my forever home, forever kingdom. The Father knows what happened in Matthew 26. Just let me read it to you. Jesus is brought before the high priest and is on trial there. And in verse 62, the high priest stands up and says, "Have you no answer to make, Jesus? What is it that these men testify against you?" And Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest understood that he was claiming not only to be a man, but to be God. And so verse 65, the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy." The Antichrist really did utter blasphemy. Jesus was speaking truthfully, though. But he's accused of speaking blasphemy. What further witness do we need? You have now heard this blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they answered, "He deserves death, and at the hands of the Jewish kingdom beast, if you would, the Romans crucified Jesus. At the hands of this beast, they say, he deserves death." They spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" It's this radical thing that happens when Jesus is on trial before these temporal kings and kingdoms. But the Father sees that. And when we're tempted to say, man, the high priest really is calling the shots, or the Roman Empire really is the one pulling the strings, the book of Romans teaches that no, they are not on the throne. They are not in control, not ultimately. Romans 3 says the Father set forth the Son as a propitiation, as a sacrifice that bears God's wrath all the way to the end, and in doing so, turns God's wrath toward us into favor. It was the Father who appointed the Son to die so that he could treat Jesus on the cross as though he lived our sinful lives, so that now he could treat us as though we lived his holy life. And Philippians 2 says that because Jesus humbled himself and became obedient even to the point of death, he willingly laid down his life. Because of that, Philippians 2 says the Father has given him a name which is above every name, and that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow, every tongue confess in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. It's this Daniel 7 scene where all will fall down and serve him and worship him. It's him, Jesus Christ. He's the King of Kings. Gives me chills. He's the Lord of Lords. He's coming back in power and in glory and in victory. And Daniel chapter 7 says that his kingdom shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. When David slayed Goliath, all of Israel got the kingdom. When Jesus throws down and stamps out the serpent, we all will partake in and possess the kingdom with him forever, forever and ever. The Father set him forth, Romans 3:25, as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. We can receive this today by faith in him. The Father validates the Son. He condemns and executes and burns with fire the Antichrist, but Jesus Christ, the Father validates. In Romans chapter 1, I'm so close to being done, but just listen to this. This is the gospel of God, which was promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his Son, who descended from David according to the flesh, and was declared to be the Son of God in power, according to the Spirit of holiness, according to that holy, just fire that issues forth from the throne of God's judgment. Jesus passes through those flames and is declared to be the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. The resurrection is Jesus emerging from those flames, not as one destroyed because he fell short of the glory of God, but as one victorious because he is the express image of the glory of God. This is good news. And in verse 13 and 14, when it says, he's presented before the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom. It's the same scene from Revelation chapter 5, when everybody's weeping because the Ancient of Days has this scroll that's sealed with 7 seals and written on both sides. We know from other passages in Scripture, I'm out of time, we don't have time, but we know that that's how they would do title deeds to land. It's this trust, it's this title deed that was given to Adam and Eve, to humanity, to rule and reign in the name, as they reflect the name of the true and living God, the character of the true and living God. But that was forfeited. They would write the first owner of the land on one side of the scroll, but then if it was given to a new owner of the land, they'd break the seal, they'd write on the back side of it, the new owner. They'd seal it with 7 seals. The new owner, Satan, the prince of the power of this world, he's been running around in a beastly, grotesque way, pictured in Daniel 7. And nobody can loose those seals. And everybody's weeping in Revelation chapter 5. Who is worthy? And then one of the elders points out to John the Apostle. He says, check this out. There is a lamb having just been slain, and he, the Son of Man, Jesus the Christ. He is worthy. And he takes the scroll. He's given a kingdom. That's what happens. And it is with the title deed to the universe that he rides in on the clouds to establish his kingdom that we will get to partake in. As we continue through the book of Daniel, we'll learn more details about all of this, but that's where we'll call it for today. Let's pray.